Hello everyone, and welcome to my General Hospital Today channel. Ned Quartermaine's long-awaited awakening is about to shatter Port Charles to its core, and as he opens his eyes, gasping for breath and struggling to orient himself, a terrible secret hangs on his tongue, one that could turn the entire Quartermaine dynasty upside down and rewrite the truth about the recent rumor mill that has been swirling around town. For weeks, devoted General Hospital viewers have been bracing for impact after an alleged leak hinted that a beloved father and grandfather would meet his tragic end, and early speculation pointed directly at Marshall Ashford, a man whose history, misdiagnosis, and complicated bond with Curtis made him seem like the perfect candidate for a shock departure. But as each episode passed without so much as a sniffle from Marshall, who was last seen smiling, embracing fatherhood news, and doling out sage advice, it became increasingly clear that nothing fatal was looming immediately over him. Curtis and Portia's announcement that they were expecting, even amid the ashes of a marriage on the brink of divorce, should have created emotional turbulence, but it instead gave Marshall renewed purpose and joy. No health scares, no cryptic dialogues, no foreboding musical cues. In fact, the show went out of its way to portray Marshall as grounded and stable, a man who had overcome years of being misdiagnosed with schizophrenia, triumphing over the shadows of his past. So when viewers heard that a father and grandfather was going to die and speculation centered on Marshall, maybe, just maybe, the dots were connected by someone who didn't have the full picture. Because as Ned collapsed to the ground in the Quartermaine mansion, clutching his chest while Drew Cain mocked him for faking a heart attack, the real tragedy of the week began to unfold. Ned's tirade against Drew, fueled by months of resentment over Drew's power plays, manipulation, and relentless attempts to chip away at the Quartermaine legacy, came to a sudden, catastrophic halt when his body simply couldn't take the stress anymore. And Drew, hobbling away with his cane like some twisted version of Scrooge who had learned nothing from his ghosts, left Ned gasping for air, alone on the polished hardwood floor of the home he had spent decades defending. If not for Joe's youthful instincts and Britt Westbourne's medical brilliance, Ned might have died right there in the foyer. But that rescue didn't guarantee safety, not by a long shot. As hours stretched into days and GH continued showcasing mayoral debates, teen arrests, and everything except the status of Ned's surgery, a suffocating silence settled over the fanbase. Why no updates? Why no anxious Quartermaines pacing the waiting room? Why no medical charts, no urgent consultations, no dramatic bedside vigils? A character with Ned's legacy should have been central all week, yet the show kept his condition tucked neatly in the background, almost as though they didn't want viewers to look too closely. And that's when fans began asking a chilling question: what if the leak was never about Marshall at all? What if the vague phrase "a father and grandfather will die unexpectedly" actually referred to someone else entirely, someone with decades tied to the show? Someone deeply woven into Port Charles history, someone like Ned Ashton Quartermaine. Consider the facts. Ned is indeed a father and grandfather. He has a long lineage connected to some of the most powerful families in town. He is a legacy character whose loss would send emotional shockwaves through several storylines at once. And his heart attack was sudden, catastrophic, and arrived without any foreshadowing, matching the exact structure of the original rumor. Marshall, on the other hand, has been peaceful, present, and medically stable. The more that time goes on without any signs pointing toward his demise, the more the spotlight returns to Ned, lying unconscious, drifting between life and death, with the weight of a terrible secret pressing against his chest. Because the truth is, Ned didn't just collapse from stress. He collapsed in the middle of an argument about Drew Cain's behavior, and Ned has been holding on to information, explosive information, that could destroy relationships, derail careers, and send shockwaves through the entire Quartermaine family. Secrets are as intrinsic to Port Charles as the docks, but this one? This one has been festering. This one has claws. And now, as Ned awakens in that sterile hospital room, surrounded by monitors blinking in slow, rhythmic patterns, the memory of what he knows floods back to him with terrifying speed. The room spins, voices blur, but the truth remains sharp and undeniable. He wasn't supposed to survive. Not according to whoever wanted him silenced. Because the heart attack wasn't just bad timing, it may have been the perfect distraction. Someone has been pulling strings in the background, and Ned's collapse played right into their hands. And now that he's awake, the terrible secret he's been keeping threatens to expose not only the puppet master but the very reason why the rumor about an impending death even surfaced. Perhaps the leaker saw fragments of the story, papers, script notes, overheard conversations, and misinterpreted them. What if those fragments were pointing toward Ned's near-death crisis instead of Marshall's still stable storyline? What if the notes referenced an older man with adult children and grandchildren, someone connected to major ongoing arcs, someone the writers were preparing to place in grave danger? That describes Ned far better than Marshall. And now the puzzle pieces align, the radio silence, the off-screen surgery updates, the way the story refuses to advance openly. GH is hiding something. And that something is that Ned's survival, and the secret he carries, is about to unleash consequences that will ripple across the entire canvas. Picture the moment. Ned weakly lifts his head, his voice hoarse, his breath short. Olivia squeezes his hand, pleading for him to rest, but Ned shakes his head. He must speak. He must reveal the truth before fate, or whoever engineered this crisis, strikes again. And as he forces out the first words, the room chills. The truth is darker than anyone imagined. The terrible secret he's been burying involves alliances he never meant to uncover, manipulations he stumbled upon accidentally, and betrayals rooted deep within both the Quartermain and Corinthos spheres. This secret didn't just cause a heart attack, it put a target on his back. And the rumor about Marshall? That was simply the wrong thread, pulled from the wrong sweater, by someone who didn't know how to interpret what they found. It was never Marshall's life hanging in the balance, it was Ned's. And now, with Ned awake and fighting for breath, the future of Port Charles hinges on whether he can get those words out before someone ensures he never speaks again. As Ned's eyes flutter open again, the room bathed in the dim glow of hospital monitors, the tension around his bed thickens like storm clouds ready to burst, and everyone who loves him hovers somewhere between hope and dread, waiting for the moment he can finally articulate what his subconscious has been fighting so desperately to bring forward. But the secret he carries isn't just a stray piece of gossip or a passing observation, it is the kind of revelation that has the power to destabilize entire families, corporations, and political campaigns, because Ned, unlike most in Port Charles, actually saw something that wasn't meant for his eyes, something that connects the Quartermain mansion, the mayoral race, Drew Kane's troubling behavior, and a shadowy figure who has been slithering through the town unnoticed. And as his consciousness sharpens, his fragmented thoughts begin weaving themselves into a coherent picture, one that explains the silence surrounding his surgery and the strange, almost calculated lack of urgency from the medical team. It is as though the show itself is tiptoeing around Ned's truth, delaying the moment he speaks, delaying the chaos that his words will ignite. And while viewers initially believed that Marshall Ashford was destined for tragedy, the complete lack of foreshadowing around him now looks suspiciously like misdirection. Perhaps someone wanted Marshall's name circulating so that no one paid attention to the real target. Because Ned's collapse wasn't just a medical event. It was the culmination of weeks, months, even, of subtle signs, odd encounters, whispered phone calls overheard in corners of the Quartermain mansion that Ned wished he had ignored. He first became suspicious when ELQ documents began disappearing or being altered without authorization, and he noticed Drew becoming increasingly aggressive, unhinged, fueled by something darker than mere corporate ambition. Drew's vendetta against the Quartermains had reached a fever pitch, but Ned began to understand that Drew wasn't acting alone. Someone was feeding him information, dangerous information, guiding him toward taking down the family from the inside out. And Ned, always fighting to hold his family's legacy together, found himself torn between exposing what he knew and protecting the people he loved. But then one night, not long before his heart attack, Ned overheard a conversation that wasn't meant for human ears. Two voices, one familiar, one terrifyingly not, stood in the Quartermain study late at night, discussing plans that involved more than just ELQ. It involved political influence, control over the PCPD, the outcome of the mayoral election, and something cryptically referred to as the insurance policy. That phrase lodged itself in Ned's mind like a thorn he couldn't remove. He didn't know what it meant then. He barely knows now. But he knows enough to realize that someone in Port Charles, someone with power, is orchestrating events with chilling precision. And that someone knew Ned was close to uncovering the truth. Which meant Ned's heart attack might not have been natural at all. The moment that realization registers fully in his still healing brain, his pulse spikes on the monitor, triggering alarms that bring nurses rushing into the room, but Ned weakly lifts a hand to signal that he is all right. He simply remembers. Olivia, tears glossing her eyes, begs him to rest, but Ned cannot rest, because rest means silence, and silence is exactly what the person behind his collapse wants. And if Ned doesn't speak soon, he may never get another opportunity. Meanwhile, across town, Marshall Ashford goes about his day completely unaware of the swirling speculation surrounding his supposed demise. Curtis confides in Portia that the rumor about Marshall had shaken him more than he admitted, but Portia insists that Marshall is strong, healthy, and finally in a place of emotional stability after years of believing he was a danger to his own family. The misdiagnosis that haunted him for decades, the belief that schizophrenia defined his entire identity, had nearly pushed him into a spiral that robbed him of precious years with Curtis. But now, with clarity restored and new life entering the family, Marshall is more grounded than he has ever been. And yet the rumor persists in online forums, fan groups, and even in the whispered conversations of Port Charles residents who fear the worst. But what they don't see, what only the viewers can sense, is that Marshall's stability is the very reason the rumor feels wrong. The writers are clever. They lay breadcrumbs, but they rarely waste emotional build-ups. And Marshall has had no build-up whatsoever. But Ned? Ned has been drowning in tension for weeks. Every conversation he's had has been tinged with anxiety, paranoia, and a sense of urgency that others dismissed as him overreacting or being dramatic, because Ned has a history of doing just that. But this time he was right. And now that he's awake, he'll finally be able to prove it. But before he can speak, a figure appears in his hospital doorway, someone Ned didn't expect, someone who shouldn't be there. He tries to call out, but his voice is a rasp. The figure steps inside, casual, almost too casual, and closes the door behind them. The air thickens. The heart monitor ticks in slow, heavy beats. Ned's eyes widen as he recognizes them. It's someone whose involvement changes everything. Someone who connects Marshall's rumor to Ned's collapse. Someone who has been playing both sides, feeding misinformation to the wrong people, letting rumors spread like wildfire to distract from the real plot unfolding behind the scenes. They approach Ned's bed slowly, smiling, offering false concern, asking how he feels, but their eyes tell the truth, they need Ned to stay quiet. Forever. The terrible secret burns on Ned's tongue, threatening to spill out, but as the figure inches closer, Ned realizes the danger is far greater than he understood. This isn't about ELQ. This isn't even just about the Quartermaines. It's about control. Power. Influence over Port Charles at every level, political, corporate, medical, legal. And Ned, without meaning to, stumbled into the center of an operation designed to remain invisible. The rumor about Marshall's death wasn't misinformation, it was a smokescreen. Someone planted it deliberately, knowing fans and residents alike would latch onto it. Because what better way to hide a real target than by pointing everyone toward the wrong one? The figure at Ned's bedside leans in closer, their smile tightening as they speak in low, measured tones, warning him that speaking out now would cause chaos for everyone he loves. They frame it as concern, as protection, but Ned knows manipulation when he sees it. And as his fear spikes, so does his resolve. Because Ned realizes the secret he holds is no longer just his burden, it's his responsibility to expose the truth. For his family. For Port Charles. And yes, for Marshall, whose name was dragged into danger he didn't sign up for. But just as Ned reaches for the call button, the figure's hand shoots out, pressing his wrist down against the sheets, gentle but firm, authoritative. The message is clear. Stay silent. Or else. Meanwhile, downstairs, Olivia and Brooke Lynn discuss how the hospital staff keeps avoiding giving them clear answers. Brooke Lynn, always sharper than she pretends, points out that the timing of Ned's attack feels suspicious, right in the middle of confronting Drew, right when ELQ drama is escalating again, right when tensions around the mayoral race are reaching fever pitch. Olivia tries to brush away those concerns, but her trembling voice betrays her. And as they speak, Marshall walks through the hospital lobby with Curtis, the two of them talking openly about that rumor, laughing it off now that it has clearly proven false. But what Marshall doesn't realize is that he's walking directly into the same building where Ned lies in danger, not just from his failing heart but from someone who intends to keep him quiet. And as Marshall steps onto the elevator, his life intersects with Ned's storyline in a way neither man can possibly anticipate. Because Marshall's presence in the hospital triggers a chain of events Ned didn't expect. When Marshall exits the elevator on Ned's floor, intending to visit an old friend, he accidentally catches sight of someone slipping out of Ned's room, someone he recognizes. Someone who shouldn't be there. Someone who freezes when Marshall calls their name. And in that split-second moment, everything changes. Ned's secret doesn't just threaten one storyline anymore, it threatens all of them. Because the person who walked out of that room is connected to Marshall in ways the audience has been waiting years to learn. And now the rumor that once seemed wrong suddenly seems prophetic again, but in a completely different way. As Marshall watches the person hurry down the hall, his instincts scream that something is horribly wrong. He turns toward Ned's room, pushes the door open, and finds Ned pale, breathless, terrified. And then Ned, gathering every ounce of strength he has left, whispers the first piece of the terrible secret he has been fighting to reveal, words Marshall was never meant to hear, words that will pull him into the very storyline fans thought he wouldn't be part of at all. Words that prove the rumor wasn't wrong. It was simply misinterpreted. Because the truth is far more dangerous than anyone assumed. And now that Ned has spoken the first piece aloud, nothing, and no one, in Port Charles will ever be the same. Marshall freezes in the doorway for a moment that seems to stretch into eternity, taking in the sight before him, Ned, pale and trembling, eyes wide with a mix of fear and desperation, struggling to form words his body refuses to release with ease. The machines beside the bed hum and beep in uneven rhythms, reflecting the chaos inside him, and Marshall can instantly see that whatever is troubling Ned runs far deeper than the aftermath of a cardiac event. He steps closer, lowering his voice and offering a steadying hand, telling Ned to breathe, to take his time, to let the words come when they're ready. But Ned's panic is palpable, his fingers tremble as he grips Marshall's wrist, as though anchoring himself to someone he instinctively trusts with the weight of what he is about to say. And Marshall, despite having just walked into the center of a storm he never saw coming, feels his own heartbeat quicken because something in Ned's eyes, something raw, pleading, terrified, tells him this isn't just a family scandal or a corporate betrayal. This is bigger. Much bigger. And the moment Ned whispers those first fractured words, "It wasn't an accident," Marshall's world tilts. Ned struggles to continue, his breath hitching, but he forces out the next piece, someone, inside ELQ, inside Port Charles, they're working with him. Marshall's brow furrows, trying to connect the dots, but Ned continues, voice strained and harsh, "I heard them, the night before, talking about leverage, talking about the election, talking about, you." That single word, you, shakes Marshall's composure. He stumbles back a half step, his mind already spinning. Why would anyone be talking about him? Why would a conspiracy involving ELQ, political power plays, and hidden agendas include his name? He presses Ned for more clarity, but Ned's strength falters, and the room spins around him as the strain of speaking becomes overwhelming. Marshall instinctively hits the call button, shouting for help, and within seconds a team of nurses and a doctor rush into the room, ushering Marshall aside while they stabilize Ned's breathing and adjust his medication. But Marshall isn't the only one who heard Ned's cryptic warning. Just outside the room, someone stands around the corner, partially hidden behind a curtain used to divide the ward, listening intently. They aren't surprised by what Ned said, on the contrary, they look irritated, as though Ned's awakening has forced the timeline to shift in ways they did not intend. They quietly slip away, heading toward the stairwell instead of the elevators, disappearing into the belly of the hospital before Marshall or anyone else can notice. Meanwhile, Marshall paces back and forth outside Ned's room, replaying every syllable in his mind. Why him? Why now? He spent years rebuilding his life, healing old wounds, repairing bonds with Curtis and forging new ones with his grandchildren and extended family. After decades of misdiagnosis and fear, he finally had found stability. So why would his name surface in whatever scheme Ned overheard? Marshall pulls out his phone to call Curtis, but stops. What would he even say? That Ned Quartermain, seconds away from passing out, told him there's someone dangerous pulling strings across Port Charles and that Marshall is somehow caught in the crossfire? Curtis already has enough on his plate, with a pending divorce, a new baby on the way, and the pressure of his commitments. Marshall doesn't want to scare him or, worse, drag him into a situation he can't yet define. But as he stands there, wrestling with indecision, a familiar voice calls his name from the end of the hallway. It's Stella, clutching a file and marching toward him with her usual mix of determination and suspicion. She had come to the hospital to follow up on a patient from her advocacy group, but one look at Marshall's face tells her something is wrong, very wrong. Marshall hesitates, but Stella is not a woman easily kept in the dark. She pulls him into a quiet corner, demanding to know why he looks as though he has seen a ghost. And so, cautiously, Marshall tells her about Ned's warning, but omits the part about someone talking about him specifically.